I am standing on the very spot where Jonathan Edwards gave his Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God sermon in Enfield, Connecticut. This was a major area of focus in Douglas Winiarski's Jonathan Edwards' Enthusiast, Radical Revivalism, and the Great Awakening in the Connecticut Valley, which included impressive scholarship and fastidious footnoting, along with copious amounts of research resulting in quite a bit of previously unpublished primary source material from individual ministers' diaries and records. He sought to make a case for the duality or incongruency of Edwards as both a very spark for the revival in the greater Connecticut Valley, as firebrand revival speaker with this sermon, and his later more conservative and cautious approach to revival activities and itinerant preaching. Winiarski pointed to a possible connection with what Edwards experienced in his own Northampton parish when he was visited by Samuel Buell, who was initially welcomed by Edwards until he created disorder in Northampton with his flock, including his wife, Sarah Edwards, who fell under the speaker's spell, causing great commotion in Northampton. Edwards spoke of his people having been whipped into religious fervor, allowing Satan to take the advantage to lead his congregation towards enthusiasm and error. Strong words indeed. Perhaps Winiarski's greatest contribution was the great emphasis throughout the work that he placed on correcting the historical record with regard to Edwards. One concern with this article is that it begins instantly as a narrative and never pauses to frame its purpose or its objectives. While riveting, it was a bit disconcerting to not know what the purpose driving the article was. It made it difficult to assess whether it was successful in its goals, as none had been openly declared other than the correcting of the record and the proving of Edwards being both firebrand and later a more moderate, even perhaps conservative voice. Others support Winiarski's view, including Perry Miller. Ross J. Pudeloff noted in his article, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, Socioeconomic and Intellectual Matrices for Edwards' Sermon, that Miller had suggested that Edwards had a pull towards mysticism and pantheism that was restrained merely by the brute willpower with the forms of ancient Calvinism. George Marsden, in his Old, Rested, and Reformed Reflections on the Recovery of Edwards, credited Miller with rescuing Edwards from obscurity. As for the why, he would point to Edwards serving as a crucial bridge between the tradition of St. Augustine and Calvin and other Reformed leaders. Stephen Richard Turley, in an article published in Christianity and Literature in the summer of 2008, provided a helpful bit of historiography on how this famous sermon came to be viewed in his article on ritualized context and speech, noting the role of the covenant-based society with the preacher as authority figure and the sermon as having a value perhaps related to divine nature. He observed that Edwards had given the same speech in Northampton, but not enjoyed the same result he found in Enfield. Pudeloff pointed out that this was perhaps because Edwards viewed Enfield residents as sinners with much to repent about, a point Winiarski himself referenced the notoriously sermon-proof community of Enfield, but then deconstructed that this was what led Edwards to abandon his reserved approach to preaching. Alexander Medlicott Jr., in the wake of Mr. Edwards' most awakening sermon at Enfield, noted that many in the region, including the Reverend Stephen Williams from up the road in nearby Longmeadow, Mass., was in attendance for the sinner's speech, while initially being taken by the experience, soon found great skepticism about the whole business. At the conclusion of the article, one is left without a sense of closure, lacking a clear argument. Winiarski does not provide a working explanation for the revival's impact and then waning influence in the valley. In fairness to Winiarski, if his goal was but to faithfully restore the historical record with all of the subtlety and nuance that grand presumptions and schemes to explain Edwards and his sermon's impact had distorted, he faithfully tended to that labor. Perhaps then the lack of a grand overarching premise was all the more appropriate and should be celebrated. Before I sign off, I do want to show you the rock that is a marker to the sermon here in Enfield. Thank you.